Coward. The young man's name was Keshav, and the young woman's name was Prema. Both were students at the same college and in the same class. Keshav was a young man with modern ideas, an opponent of the shackles of caste. Prema, on the other hand, was deeply rooted in traditional beliefs, holding unwavering faith in old customs and traditions. Yet, despite their differences, the two had fallen deeply in love, and this was widely known throughout the college. Though Keshav was a Brahmin, he wanted to marry Prema, a Vaishya girl, to give meaning to his life. He had no regard for his parents' opinions. The notion of family honor seemed like a farce to him. For him, the only truth was love, but for Prema, taking even one step against her parents' wishes and family honor was impossible. It was evening. Both sat facing each other on the green grass in a deserted spot in Victoria Park. The other walkers had left one by one, but they remained seated, engrossed in a conversation that seemed to have no end. Frustrated, Keshav said, "So this means you don't care about me?" Prema, trying to calm him, replied, "You are being unjust to me, Keshav. But I don't know how to bring up this topic with my parents. They are staunch believers in old traditions. You can imagine the doubts and concerns that will cloud their minds when they hear such a thing from me." With agitation, Keshav asked, "So, you too are a slave to these old traditions?" Prema, with tenderness in her large eyes, responded, "No, I am not a slave to them, but my parents' wishes are more important to me than anything else." Don't you have any individuality? Think of it that way. I always thought such farcical traditions were only for fools, but now I see that even intelligent women like you worship them. When I am ready to give up the whole world for you, I expect the same from you. Prema thought to herself, what right do I have over my own body? My parents, who created me from their blood and nurtured me with their love, I have no right to go against their wishes. Humbly, she said to Keshav, "Can love only exist between a man and a woman, and not as a friendship? I see it as a bond of souls." With a stern tone, Keshav said, "These philosophical thoughts will drive me mad, Prema. Just understand this, I cannot live in despair. I am a realist, and it is impossible for me to enjoy the pleasures of an imagined world." Saying this, he tried to pull Prema closer by grabbing her hand. Prema quickly withdrew her hand and said, "No, Keshav, I have already told you, I am not free. Don't ask me for something over which I have no right." Had Prema spoken harsh words, Keshav wouldn't have been as hurt. For a moment, he sat there in silence, then stood up, speaking in a voice filled with despair, "As you wish." He walked away, his steps slow and heavy. Prema remained seated, her tears flowing freely. That night, after dinner, Prema lay down with her mother, but sleep eluded her. Keshav had said something that, like a shadow cast on restless water, hovered over her heart. The shadow shifted constantly, and she couldn't hold it still. How could she discuss this with her mother? Shame sealed her lips. She wondered, if I don't marry Keshav, what will my duty be? If Keshav does something rash, what will remain for me in this world? But what power do I have? Among all these swirling thoughts, one thing became clear in her mind. I will not marry anyone but Keshav. Her mother asked, still awake? I've told you so many times to do some household chores now and then, but you're always buried in your books. In 4 days, you'll be going to another house, and who knows what kind of house it'll be. If you're not used to doing work, how will you manage? Prema responded innocently, why should I go to another house at all? Her mother smiled and said, for girls, that's the greatest misfortune. Raised in their parents' lap, and as soon as they grow up, they belong to someone else. If they find good people, life passes in peace, otherwise, they spend their days crying. Everything depends on fate. I don't like any house in our community. No one respects girls. But we have to marry within the community. Who knows when this caste system will break? Prema, trembling, replied, in some places, marriages are happening outside the community too. She said it, but her heart quivered, fearing her mother might guess her intention. Her mother, astonished, asked, has that happened among Hindus? Then she answered her own question, even if it has happened in a few places, what difference does it make? Prema gave no reply, afraid that her mother might understand her meaning. Her future stood before her like a dark abyss, ready to swallow her whole. At some point, she fell asleep. The next morning, when Prema woke up, a strange courage had arisen within her. All important decisions are made suddenly, as if some divine force pulls us towards them. This was the state Prema found herself in. Until yesterday, she had accepted her parents' decisions as law, but now, seeing the impending crisis, a new boldness surged in her, like a gentle breeze turning into a fierce wind that climbs the mountain and crushes it. She thought, this body may belong to my parents, but my soul is mine. Whatever my soul endures, it will endure through this body. Now, hesitating on this matter is not just improper but fatal. Why should she sacrifice her life for a false sense of honor? She realized that if love was not the foundation of marriage, then marriage was merely a sale of the body. Why should she surrender her soul without love? The very thought of marrying some unknown young man made her heart revolt. As she finished her breakfast and was about to start studying, her father affectionately called her. I went to see your principal yesterday. He spoke very highly of you. Prema responded sincerely, you always say that. No, really. He opened a drawer in his desk, pulled out a velvet-framed picture, and showed it to her, saying, this boy came first in the ICS exams. You must have heard his name? The elderly father had built up the moment in such a way that her mother didn't understand the intention, but Prema had already sensed it. Her heart had pierced straight to the target. Without even looking at the picture, she said, no, I haven't heard his name. Feigning surprise, her father said, what? You haven't heard his name? His picture and life story are in today's newspaper. Prema curtly replied, perhaps, but I don't see any importance in that exam. I believe that the people who take that exam are selfish to the core. After all, what other purpose do they have but to rule over their poor, downtrodden brothers and accumulate wealth? That's not a noble purpose in life. There was bitterness, unfairness, and cruelty in her objection. Her father had thought that Prema would be swayed by the boy's praise. Hearing her response, he replied sharply, you are talking as if wealth and power mean nothing to you. Prema, with stubbornness, said, yes, I don't see any value in them. I see sacrifice in a person. I know young men who wouldn't accept that position even if it were forced upon them. Mockingly, her father said, that's a new one for me. I see people running around for even the smallest jobs. I'd love to see the face of a boy with so much sacrifice in him. I'd worship him. On another occasion, Prema might have hung her head in shame at such words, but at that moment, she was like a soldier cornered by a deep ravine. She had no choice but to move forward. Suppressing her anger with control, eyes filled with rebellion, she went to her room, selected one of Keshav's pictures, the one she found least appealing, and brought it to her father. Her elderly father looked at the picture with disdain at first, but upon the first glance, he was drawn to it. Keshav was tall, and though thin, his build hinted at health and discipline. His face didn't radiate brilliance, but there was a certain reflection of thoughtfulness that inspired trust. Looking at the picture, her father asked, who is this? Lowering her head in hesitation, Prema replied, he's in my class. From our caste? Prema's face fell. The answer to this question would decide her fate. She regretted bringing the picture out. The brief moment of courage she had felt was now crushed under the weight of this sharp question. In a faint voice, she said, no, he's a Brahmin. And with that, she fled the room, as if the air was choking her, and cried behind the wall. Her father's first instinct was to call her back and tell her firmly that this was impossible. He reached the door in anger but softened upon seeing her cry. He could no longer hide Prema's feelings for this young man. He was a strong supporter of women's education, but he also wanted to preserve the family's honor. He would have sacrificed everything for a suitable match within their caste, but the thought of a marriage outside it, no matter how distinguished the man, was unbearable. He couldn't imagine a greater dishonor. In a harsh tone, he said, from today, you're not going back to college. If education teaches you to forsake family honor, it's not education but miseducation. Prema, in a desperate voice, pleaded, but the exams are near. Her father resolutely replied, let them come. He then went to his room and sank into thought. 6 months passed. Her father called his wife aside in private and said, from what I know, Keshav is a very gentle and intelligent young man. I'm beginning to think that Prema will waste away in grief. You've tried to reason with her, I've tried to reason with her, others have tried to, but it seems to have no effect. What else can we do? His wife, troubled, replied, you may go ahead, but where will you go after that? I don't know where this wretched girl came from. He frowned with a hint of disdain and said, I've heard that 1,000 times, but how long can we keep crying over family honor? Expecting a bird to keep hopping around your courtyard once its wings have grown is an illusion. I've thought long and hard about this and have come to the conclusion that we must accept this situation. I cannot kill Prema in the name of family honor. Let the world laugh at us if they must, but the time is coming soon when all these bonds will break. Even today, hundreds of marriages have taken place, breaking the shackles of caste. If the purpose of marriage is a happy life for the couple, then we cannot ignore Prema's wishes. The old woman, distressed, replied, if that's what you want, why ask me? But let me tell you, I will have nothing to do with this marriage, nor will I ever see this girl's face again. I'll consider her dead, just like all the other children who've passed. Then what do you suggest we do? Why not marry her off to that boy? What's wrong with him? In 2 years, he'll pass the civil service exam. What does Keshav have? At best, he'll become a clerk in some office. And if Prema takes her own life? Let her. You are just giving her more encouragement. If she doesn't care for us, why should we bring shame upon ourselves for her? Taking one's life isn't a game. This is all just a threat. The mind is like a wild horse until you rein it in. It won't let you lay a hand on its back. And who's to say she'll live happily with Keshav? The way she loves him today, she might love someone else tomorrow. So, what do you want? To sell your own flesh? Her husband, giving her a questioning look, said, and if tomorrow she goes off and marries Keshav on her own, what will you do then? What honor will remain for you? She may sit quietly out of shame or respect for us now, but if she sets her mind to it, we won't be able to stop her. The thought of such a terrible outcome hadn't crossed the old woman's mind. The question struck her like a bomb, leaving her speechless for a moment, as if the blow had scattered her senses. Finally, defeated, she said, you come up with the strangest ideas. I've never heard of a noble girl marrying of her own free will. You may not have heard of it, but I have seen it, and it's very possible. The day that happens, you won't see me alive. I'm not saying it will happen, but it's possible. Then if it's going to happen, we might as well arrange it ourselves. If we're going to lose face, let it be with a sharp knife rather than a blunt one. Call Keshav tomorrow and see what he says. Keshav's father was a retired government servant, irritable and miserly by nature. He found peace in religious rituals and had no imagination. He couldn't respect anyone's feelings. He still lived in the world of his childhood and youth, and he called the rising wave of modernity a sign of destruction. He was determined to keep his own house safe from it, using all his strength. So, when one day Prema's father came to him with a proposal for Prema's marriage to Keshav, the old Pandit lost control. His eyes bulging, he said, have you lost your mind? A marriage like this is no marriage. It seems you two have been swept up by modern ideas. Prema's father, humbly, replied, I don't like this kind of match either. I share the same views as you, but the situation has forced me to come to you. You know how independent today's young men and women have become. For us old folks, it's getting harder to uphold our principles. I fear these two might do something reckless. The old Pandit, stomping his foot on the ground, roared, what are you saying, sir? Don't you have any shame? We are Brahmins, and not just any Brahmins, but of noble lineage. No matter how degraded Brahmins have become, they haven't fallen so low as to marry the daughters of traders and shopkeepers. The day there are no more girls left among the noble Brahmins, this issue may arise. But how dare you come to me with this proposal? The more submissive Prema's father became, the more furious the old Pandit grew. Finally, unable to bear the insult, Prema's father cursed his fate and left. At that very moment, Keshav came home from college. The Pandit immediately called him and said sternly, "I've heard you've married some trader's daughter. Is there any truth to this?" Feigning ignorance, Keshav asked, "Who told you that?" "Someone told me. I'm asking if it's true or not. If it's true, and you've decided to disgrace our honor, then you have no place in this house. You won't get a penny of my earnings. What I have is my own hard-earned money, and I have the right to give it to whomever I choose. You will not set foot in my house after committing such an outrage." Keshav knew his father's nature. He loved Prema and secretly wanted to marry her. His father wouldn't live forever, and he trusted his mother's affection. He seemed ready to endure any hardship for the sake of his love. But, like a cowardly soldier who loses heart in front of a gun and retreats, Keshav too lost his nerve. Like most young men, he could argue eloquently for his principles and passionately declare his devotion, but he lacked the strength to endure the suffering that comes with them. If he stood his ground and his father held his stance, what would become of him? His life would be ruined. In a subdued voice, he said, "Whoever told you that was lying?" The Pandit, with piercing eyes, asked, "So it's completely false?" "Yes, completely false." "Then write a letter to that trader's daughter today, right now. And remember, if I ever hear such talk again, I will become your worst enemy. Now go." Keshav had no response. He left, feeling as if his legs had no strength. The next day, Prema wrote a letter to Keshav. "Dear Keshav, I've heard about the rude and insulting way your father treated Lalaji, and it has filled me with doubt. He must have scolded you too. I am anxiously waiting to hear your decision. I am ready to endure any hardship with you. I have no interest in your father's wealth, I only want your love, and I am content with that. Please come here tonight for dinner. Both my father and mother are eager to meet you. I am lost in the dream of the day when we will be bound in that unbreakable bond, a bond that even the greatest of hardships cannot sever. Yours, Prema." Evening came, but no reply arrived. Prema's mother kept asking, "Hasn't Keshav come yet?" The old Lalaji too kept glancing at the door. 9 o'clock came, but neither Keshav nor his letter arrived. Prema's mind was filled with a whirlwind of thoughts. Perhaps he didn't have time to write, or maybe he couldn't come today, but he will surely come tomorrow. She reread all the love letters Keshav had written to her before. How full of affection they had been. Every word dripped with love. How many times had Keshav cried in front of her? With so many proofs, how could there be any room for despair? Yet, her heart felt like it was hanging on a cross all night. In the morning, Keshav's reply finally came. With trembling hands, Prema took the letter and read it. The letter slipped from her hands, and it felt as if the blood in her veins had frozen. It read, "I am in great distress over what to tell you. I have thought long and hard about this issue and have come to the conclusion that, given the current circumstances, it would be unbearable for me to go against my father's wishes. Please don't think I am a coward. I am not selfish, but I do not have the strength to overcome the obstacles before me. Forget the old days. At that time, I hadn't imagined these difficulties." Prema took a deep, burning breath and tore the letter to pieces. Tears flowed from her eyes. She had never imagined that the Keshav she had chosen with her whole heart could be so cruel. It felt as if she had been living in a golden dream, and upon waking, everything had vanished. When hope is lost, what remains but darkness? She had placed all her life's treasures on one boat, and that boat had sunk. Now, who would load another boat there? If this boat was broken, she too would drown with it. Her mother asked, "Is that a letter from Keshav?" Looking down at the floor, Prema said, "Yes, he's not feeling well." What else could she say? She didn't have the courage to confess Keshav's cruelty and betrayal. All day, she busied herself with household chores as if she had no worries. That night, she fed everyone, ate her own meal, and then spent a long time singing at the harmonium. But the next morning, her body was found lying lifeless in her room. The golden rays of dawn illuminated her pale face, giving it the glow of life.